he took, around 5 years to communicate something that he's been saying since day one, but he took the time and the patience to do it in a way that was so personal, in a way that was so meaningful, and that I couldn't believe. Pain isn't always logical. Trauma isn't always logical. And so it's an illogical response to being like, well, what if God leaves? What if God goes away? Just like my friends went away. And so I ran from that for many years. I ran away from that. And so when I read that, I realized God isn't going to leave. He's never going to abandon me, and I'm never alone. This is going to sound really strange. I don't think I've ever really shared this before.
Today we're talking to God's best friend. And no, that's not heretical. That's his literal username on social media. He has hundreds of thousands of followers for his Christian meme videos, his hilarious comedy. And today we're breaking down kind of the story and the personal journey that he's been on, that God's led him on, as well as the grief and the pain and the unknown dark moments that have actually all led into this ministry of joy and fun and humor. So you do not want to miss this, because we're going to be talking about how to co-create with God, how to step into the calling God has for you in faith and obedience, and also, more importantly, how to be intimate with God to be able to call him your best friend. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Oh my gosh, you are in for a treat today. I'm trying so hard not to fangirl, but we are sitting here right now with our top number one most favorite Christian comedy and humor influencer and creator. But he has so much more to him than just that. But before we get into his story and just the things that God has been doing in his life, some context around Gabriel, who we're interviewing today, is sometimes, we all have these days, right? You're like, I feel like icky, or like I just feel down. I need something to like lift my spirits. And I've had many of those moments myself. And Alex can attest, there have been days where suddenly out of nowhere, I'm just like cackling in the bedroom, like on my phone. And Alex is like, what are you doing? I'm like, have you seen this video? And so, yeah, I feel like there's so much, we don't talk about this a lot in the church, about the role of joy, the role of laughter, the role of the ministry of humor, really, and how that can really lift our spirits and our souls and help us. They say laughter is the best medicine, but there's so much into that God actually uses. And so today we are so honored to have Gabriel Lopez here with us, all the way from Reading, to talk to us and unpack a bit more of your story. So welcome, Gabriel.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be with you guys today. And I love to laugh too, so it feels so good to be with people that love to laugh.
Yes. I'm like trying to get that Argument theme song out of my head right now. If anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, look up the Argument reel. It's my favorite. Anyway, do you want to kick us off with the beginning?
Yeah. Usually when we interview guests like yourself, what we find is that there's often dots of connection that lead the guest or whoever we're talking with to where they are today. So we'd love to better understand who Gabriel Lopez is. Can you share a bit about how you grew up and your story and what's made the most impact on you today?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a Christian family. I knew of God. I knew of Jesus. I didn't know Jesus, though. And so I kind of just my parents were in church leadership. So I spent a lot of time in the church every Sunday. First one's there, last one's to leave, church picnics, church home groups, everything. So I knew all the scriptures. I knew all the Bible stories. Every single Sunday I was in the early bird children's church, watching Little Rascals, eating, bowls of cereal, waiting for church to start. I remember like my whole childhood. And so much fun, but didn't really know, have a personal relationship with God. And I think when I was around 16 years old, I was in church one day. And at this point, kind of definitely living a bit of a double life, kind of getting really good at playing church and on Sunday, and then kind of just living whatever life I want to, the rest of the week. So I'm in church, doing my thing. And I'm playing a game with my buddy because we're just kind of bored waiting for church to, get over. And we're playing this game where we look around the room and we find words and we try and create words from that word. Like if we looked at the instrument and we saw Yamaha, we could go yam, okay, ham, ha, like we're just trying to see how many words we can create from one word. And then when you exhaust it, you kind of just pick another word, and you just do that until the church service is over. And we were doing that, and I was like, yam, ham, ha, and then all of a sudden the pastor just calls out my name really loud, and I thought I was obviously in trouble because we were just playing this game. In the middle of the service, he just calls me out, and I look up, and he starts actually prophesying to me, and he goes, "You are going to. The Lord has given you a mind that creates so much, and He's going to give you a gift of creativity, and you're going to enter the entertainment industry." And I wasn't doing any of that at 16 years old. I wasn't in film. I had never done acting, and never done film, never done writing, never done anything like that. And so I was just kind of shocked a bit what he was saying. And he says, the Lord's going to give you all these ideas, and He's going to give you creativity. So that didn't mean anything to me logically at 16 years old, but it spoke something to me, but it ministered to me, like it marked me. I couldn't stop thinking about it when he said that. So a couple of years later, when I ended up actually kind of getting saved and having a whole, coming to Jesus moment and story, that was the first thing I thought of, was going, okay, well, all I know about what God, thinks towards me, like, or one thing I know that He thinks towards me is this whole film thing. So what does that look like to explore? And so I began to run after film real hard, and all the doors were closed in my face immediately with film. No connections opened up. There was no favor. There was no grace. There was no wind on it, which was very confusing because I'm going, okay, God, what do you want? I thought you wanted me to do this film thing. But I needed to learn my identity first. And so I ended up coming to ministry school at Bethel in Redding, California, and did the school of ministry here. And so it was a number of years later before I even got into film. I just had to kind of learn who I was first, because had I not, I think I ran after film as my identity. And I started just kind of wanting to be significant, wanting to be special, wanting to be important in the eyes of the Lord, when in reality I already deeply was important to Him. And so there was a bit of a delayed response in even the Lord allowing that film door to open by the grace of God. So that's a bit how I got started into film.
Wow, that's amazing. It reminds me of like when David was anointed king, but it took so much longer to actually become king.
Yeah.
And it is confusing when you're like, but I have this clear calling and I have this clear word. How come it doesn't come immediately? Because we're so impatient. But yeah, that's good.
I stumbled upon a video interview you did where you talked about, and also your book too, where you talked. There was one video that you had that you did on Father's Day where I believe you wrote your dad a letter. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so touching. And then you also you talked about your two best friends who passed away as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your parents impacted your faith, and also how your two friends passing away, how they impacted you?
Yeah. Growing up, my parents were both first generation Christians. Didn't grow up in. They got saved when they were, I don't know, maybe around. Well, my dad grew up Catholic, and so, but not like, believing in the Lord, having a strong relationship with the Lord. I'll say that. So they didn't really come to know Jesus well until maybe their 30s or around there, and so they had lived a good chunk of life already. Created a lot of habits already. And so a lot of my childhood was kind of a bit rough at times. There was a lot of beautiful parts, a lot of painful parts, and my parents having to try and, figure out. There was no manual on how to raise kids, in a Christian household. And so our relationship right now is actually fantastic and great. My parents live, 10 minutes away, and I see them all the time. And I was just with them on Thanksgiving, a few days ago. But over those years, it was challenging. And coming to Bethel, I thought my first when I first got here, I was like, I'm going to learn how to pray in the I'm going to prophesy and go after and be like a revivalist and a filmmaker and all these things, all these outward things. And one of the first things that God said to me is, okay, well, let's go after your father wounds. How about that? And I'm like, what father wounds, so the
I don't
first
have
year or
any.
two is, I don't have any of those. Oh yeah, I heard about those. I don't have any of those. And So the first couple of years were just kind of getting my heart healed and
Mm.
learning brave communication and learning how to actually have
Wow.
healthy relationships. And so I remember just going home over Christmas and when I was here and just having real heart to heart talks with my dad and then finding out that the Lord was working on my dad's heart just as much as mine, and we were able to grow closer and have some healing from different things from childhood. And I've watched as my parents and my dad just became so soft over the years and so tender and been really beautiful actually. So my parents have become probably my biggest supporters and in my corner for everything that I've ever done. And I go to them for advice and for spiritual covering and for love. And it's incredible how the Lord has restored and redeemed so much. And so I love my parents deeply. My dad is so amazing. Whenever he gets like teary eyed whenever he talks
Mm.
about me, he's like, I'm just so proud of my son, my boy. and
Wow.
and it just makes me, I'm just like, wow, like it really beautiful. And seeing
Mm.
my son now, I have a son named Isaac, and he's 16 months old right now. And seeing my parents with my son is just such a blessing. And seeing
Mm.
how my son lights up when he sees his grandparents, and my mom watches my son every Wednesday, and so and she brings her little dog. I forgot what kind of dog it is, but it's like this. His name's Kobe, and he's like this little like Pomeranian Chihuahua size looking dog. And my son just runs after Kobe for like 8 hours while they're here, and it's just such a blessing to see how the Lord has restored so much.
Mm.
But in accordance to your question with my friends, yeah, that was a challenging time for sure. Growing up with, I have two older sisters and no brothers, so developing friendships outside of my family, having those brothers was so important and deep to me. So losing those friends years later was so incredibly devastating, and
Mm.
realizing that when my first friend passed away, it was so devastating. But a year and a half later, I had a group of four of us total from high school that we were like best friends, and one of them passed away. And a year and a half later, we were all kind of like helping each other grieve and mourn the loss of our friend. A year and a half after that, another one of those four passed away as well in
Oh.
the same fashion in a motorcycle accident. So when my second friend passed away, it was the 1-2 punch that kind of knocked me out. And I didn't fall away from God because I still deeply loved God,
Mm.
but I lost the energy to pray, to talk to the Lord. It was a really dark time. It's strange because I wasn't angry at God. It was just I was just depleted. My soul was just so tired and weary and afraid, to be honest. And so I had this realization that I had more friends in heaven than I did on earth.
Mm.
And that's a scary thought to have. And when I thought that, I felt the Lord speak to me in that moment. He said, Gabriel, I'll be your best friend. And I would love to say that I said, yes, God, let's be best friends. Let's be buddies. And I actually said, no, I don't want any more best friends, because best friends just leave you. Best friends
Mm.
just die, or best friends, I can't,
Hmm.
I don't want any more close friends. And so I said, Lord, you can be a great friend. Like, we'll be super close.
Mm.
And I love you, but I do not want any more best friends in life. No one, not even you. And so I kind of ran away from that for a number of years. And so that book called God's Best Friend, it was is a journey of the Lord pursuing me in that, in his patience and his mercy and his grace running after me. And it's a crazy adventure of how that all plays out, and his amazingness of being persistent.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was the moment that, well, first of all, that is so relatable. I feel that like so many of us can get hurt by pain and experiences of loss and or betrayal even, and we can put up these walls where we're like we don't want anyone to come close anymore, not even God. So thank you for just sharing that so openly. I'm really curious if you can share what was the moment when you did decide to say yes to God becoming your best friend.
It's kind of funny because after I couldn't really pray much, I couldn't really I wasn't reading my Bible, I wasn't praying, I wasn't, and again, I wasn't it wasn't that I was angry or didn't believe in God. It was just when you're so when you're grieving so deeply, sometimes you get to an emotional place where there's just not capacity to do anything. And I was quite scared
Mm.
because I wasn't really contributing anything to my relationship with God. And on the surface, theologically, I knew that God is the one who is driving our relationship and everything is resting on Him. But experientially, I think deep down, when push came to shove, I was freaking out, going, "Oh my gosh, I'm not contributing anything to our
Mm.
relationship." And I just imagined us being like in this rowboat, and there's two sets of oars, and Jesus is the only one rowing, and I'm not putting it forth any effort. And so there was a part of me that was scared that I wasn't doing anything, but his response was always so kind, so merciful, so patient, so loving,
Mm.
so tender. So it was quite shocking during that time, because all I received back was love in the midst of my inability. I wanted to pray, I wanted to worship, but I couldn't. And so the Lord every few months would just keep saying to me, "I'll be your best friend. I'll be your best friend." And I would always say thanks, but no. And I felt so bad for saying that. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, am I going to get like struck by lightning
Mm.
or something? What the heck?"
Wow.
And I never felt. I just felt so much understanding from him.
Mm.
And then one day, I f- uh, I felt the Lord. It's going to sound so strange, but he said one day I woke up and I felt the Lord say to me to start praying for a dog, to start asking for a dog. And I love dogs. I love dogs just as much as I love memes. I follow all these dogs on Instagram,
Same.
and so I'm like, I grew up with dogs, and but I hadn't had a dog for many years because of all the damages that the dogs caused when I was in childhood. We got like $4,000 worth of damages in our house, and so my parents never wanted dogs ever again after that. And so after leaving my house and going to Reading, and I just hadn't had a dog for many years, so uh, I was like, okay, start praying for a dog. So I felt like to be very specific, so I got a pen and paper. I wrote down, I wanted a Boston Terrier. I wanted his personality to be like this, and I just was really descriptive, and like very descriptive. I wanted to look like this and act like this. So I started praying for this dog. Very strange, like kind of just asking for a dog from time to time. Still kind of like my relationship with the Lord is starting to creep back into a place where I can begin to pray, begin to talk with Him, which is a miracle in itself. But just getting back to a place where we can actually talk, and as I'm asking for this dog, and then a few months into it, I all of a sudden have a dream one night, and in the dream, I'm at my mom's house, and I'm there, and she in the dream, she had just gotten a Boston Terrier, and down the hall comes this Boston Terrier running at me, and I have to like brace myself because he's like this little tank, and he's like running at me, and he like jumps up to my leg and with his front paws and almost knocks me over in the dream, and I wake up, uh, and it, and I was kind of sad when I woke up because I was like, well, that's obviously never going to happen. You know, my parents are never going to get a dog, and it just was like the perfect dog that I had been, the one I had been asking for. Like that's a dog that I kind of saw, but I just kind of brushed it off. Told my wife about it. I'm like, that would be awesome, and but it's never going to happen. 3 days after the dream, I'm in town just driving around, and I get this phone call, and it's from my mom, and she's kind of whispering, and she says, "Son, you need to come over to the house right now." I'm like, "What's wrong? Why are you whispering?" She's like, "Your father's about to leave, but when he leaves, I told this lady on Craigslist that I saw she's selling a dog, and I don't know why I just responded to her and told her to bring the dog over here so I can see the dog, and I'm thinking about buying this dog." And I mean, we hadn't had a dog since like 1999 or something like
Wow.
that. So I'm like, "What are you talking?" Like out
What?
of nowhere, I'm thinking a dog. I was like, "What kind of dog are you talking about?" And she's like, "I don't know. It's like a Boston Terrier or something." She didn't even know what that breed
What?
Wow.
was. And so I was like, "Mom, I just had a dream you got a Boston Terrier," and she's like, "You need to get over here right now." So I'm driving down the freeway like 100 miles an hour. I get to the house, and my dad's gone. My dad is really the one who didn't want a dog, and so that's why my mom told the lady to come while he was gone. And so we're at the house, and I was telling my mom, like, if it's this dog, I'm gonna know it because it looked a very certain particular way, and most Bostons are a little more slender, but the one I saw was a little more bulky and tanky, kind of like a bulldog. And so next thing we know, this lady's knocking on the door, and she walks in the house, and she's carrying the exact dog from my dream,
Oh,
the exact dog. And she sits
Wow.
down, and I'm trying to like just talk to her like this is normal. I'm just freaking out. And my mom, in classic mom mode, she goes, "Son, you should tell her about the dream you had, the dream." And I look over, and I'm just like, "Mom," I'm thinking, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe she said that." And so I try and play it off, and I said, "What dream? What are you talking about?"
I'm not crazy.
Um, yeah, and she's like, but she doesn't get it. She's like, "The dream with the dog and the thing, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, 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 that dream, okay." I just was like, "Okay, well, what the heck? We're already this far." So I just said, "Hey, you may think this sounds so crazy, but I actually had a dream a few days ago, and I think it may have been the same dog that you're holding, and I know that sounds strange." And as I'm sharing this dream, she just bursts into tears and starts crying, and she says, "I just want this dog to go to a good home, and I really feel like that is you guys." And so she gives us this dog. So next thing I know, I'm holding this dog, and I'm looking at it, and it's strange when it's like you're holding something that you've dreamt about, and it just doesn't feel, it feels like
Mm.
a dream that you're in.
Mm,
And
wow.
so anyways, this dog's name is Oscar, and his birth certificate literally says Oscar Treasure. So
Wow.
Oscar Treasure Lopez now. And so his name is Oscar. So I kind of like, I just fall in love with this dog, and I had this dog for a number of years. So to go back to your question of how the Lord brought this about, it's interesting is I had this dog for maybe 3 or 4 years. I can't remember. I had to look back, but a long time after getting this dog, and the Lord is still continually saying to me, "Gabriel, I'll be your best friend," and me still saying no. And one day I was at church here, and this is a number of years after getting Oscar. And now it's like, I love this dog. This dog loves me. We hang out all the time. It's like the best dog ever. And he was literally the best dog ever. He would put himself to sleep at night at like
Wow.
10:30. He would just go to his crate and like put his head on the crate and be like, "I'm tired. I'm going to bed." Where he never peed in the house, never pooped in the house. This dog was
Wow.
heaven's dog.
Self-trained.
Wow.
So crazy. Very different from the dogs we had when we were kids. And so uh years later, I'm at church one day, and I just can't stop thinking about my friends that I'd lost for some
Mm.
reason that day. And that's kind of how grief is. Grief doesn't like schedule an appointment with you. Grief kind of just shows up when it wants, and it demands time and attention. And you can only push that down for so long before it violently takes control and says, "No, you will grieve today." And so I got one to those points where I was needing to grieve. And so I had to leave the church, and I was just driving home, just thinking of all these memories, and memories of my friends that were so loyal to me. And I remember just thinking of different memories and things. And I remember one time I made this big mistake, and I did something really dumb, and my friend took the blame for me so I wouldn't get in trouble. And one of the friends that passed away from when I was a kid, the story is in my head. And I just kind of, I just said to God in the car, I said, "You want to be my friend, you have to be as loyal as my friends were, because they were so loyal, and I don't have that loyalty in my life anymore." And it just kind of like jumped out
Wow.
at me, and I felt a bit shocked that there was something so raw and honest that jumped out. I didn't even know I was feeling that, to be honest, until it just kind of flew out of my mouth. And so I went home, and I remember just crying, and I was so my mom was the one who had Oscar at her house. Oscar was living there, and so but my mom was out of town, and so I was house sitting for her at the time during this moment. And so I would always visit Oscar all the time, but now I was getting to stay there for a few days because I was house sitting and spending more time with Oscar. And so I go to the house, back to the house, and I go sit in the bed, and I'm gonna talk to God. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Oscar jumps on the bed, starts licking my face like crazy. And I remember like just, I think ravenously just kissing my face. And I remember throwing him off of me, being like, "What are you doing?" I'm trying to talk to God and have this like deep
Mm.
moment. And so Oscar just looks at me with his like big bug eyes,
Oh.
and he just like runs
Oh.
off down the hall. And I remember like being like, "What the heck?" And so I go to look to God, and to kind of have like round two with the Lord. And all of a sudden I heard the Lord say, "Look up Oscar's name, because that's who I am, and that's why I brought him into your life." And I remember it was so clear, like so clear. "Look up his name, because that's who I am to you, and that's why I brought him into your life." So I remember being like, I don't even know what his name means. I've never Googled it. I've never even thought to look it up. So I look up, I grab my phone and I type in Oscar name meaning, and what came up was it's a name that comes from Nordic folklore, and it's about this guy who used to go into the forest and befriend deer, like the animals. And so the literal translation for Oscar is dear friend. And so
Wow.
Wow.
I was like, I said it out loud. I was like, dear friend.
Wow.
And then the Lord said to me, Gabriel, I am your dear friend. And that's why I brought him into your life. And I remember just staring at that page on my phone for like a minute or so, realizing the magnitude of what the Lord had been conveying with this dog. And the Lord knows I love dogs. And so he took, around 5 years to communicate something that he's been saying since day one, but he took the time and the patience to do it in a way that was
Mm,
so personal, in a way that was so meaningful, and that I couldn't believe when I was just 10 minutes before saying, if you're going to be my friend, you need to be as loyal as my friends were, because they were so loyal. And I don't have that loyalty anymore in my life. I don't have that. And to see all of a sudden the Lord be so loyal in that moment, so kind, so considerate, so, just thoughtful. And I was blown away. And I remember just breaking down and saying, Lord, okay, like I'll be your best friend. You be my best friend. Let's do this. And it just kind of,
Wow.
I realized in that moment he's never going to leave.
Mm.
And I think that was the fear that I had to get over. What was that I was going to be abandoned, even though
Mm.
logically it makes no sense. When your best friends die, logically, obviously it
mm,
wasn't their fault, but
Right.
pain isn't always logical.
Right.
Trauma isn't always logical. And so it's an illogical response to being like, well, what if God leaves? What if God goes away? Just like my friends went away.
Mm.
And it was painful to have that with my friends, but I couldn't imagine having it with God. And so I ran from that for many years. I ran
wow.
away from that. And so when I read that, I realized God isn't going to leave. He's never going to abandon me, and I'm never alone. And so I finally said yes to that journey.
Wow. I have chills as you were talking about that, the
Yeah.
dear friend breakdown, because it's so true. Like, God is so patient and like gracious with his timing of like revealing things. And it's crazy that for 5 years, I mean, you had Oscar for 5 years, you said, and it was like not until that moment that
Hmm.
everything clicked. But he was with you, like God was with you even through Oscar in that entire time.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know, like, how did that, like, when you had that deeper revelation of God being actually like a close, dear friend, how did that change the way you saw God, the way you interacted with him, or even, yeah, like how did you change as a person?
Yeah, I think that for me is the beginning of as much as that is like the end of a long, long journey, it's actually the beginning of a crazy adventure. From that moment, saying yes to God, being His friend, um, and it's so funny now that I have like the Instagram or TikTok name is God's best friend, which I made years later after this whole thing. Sometimes it's funny. I'll get like messages and be like, "You think you're God's best friend? I'm." And I'm like, okay, and I tell people like, yes, you are also God. Like this is like the parent who can say every kid is their favorite.
Right.
I'm not saying in this that I'm better than you. I'm saying that that's how amazing he is that he's everyone's best friend. Whatever you've lost, he can be that thing. If he can be your father or a mother, he can be that friend. He can be the brother or sister that you. And this is bragging on him. And so it just makes me laugh. I'm like, no, it's not what I mean by that. But that was the beginning of a beautiful adventure with the Lord, of saying, I'll be your best friend, and kind of switching up, priorities and things in my life to go, okay, well, what do you want to do, Lord? Where do you want to go? Who do you want to help? Who can we love on? More from a place of friendship. And whereas I think for years I loved God deeply, but there was a part of the foundation that we had in our relationship that was more, um, gosh, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe boss to employee kind
Mm.
of
Mhm.
Mm,
relationship. As much as I didn't think it was like that. I think going through all that and experiencing, you just don't know what you don't know until you get freedom and
Yeah.
feeling, oh wow, no, this is actually what we were supposed to be doing the whole time. This is what you always had envisioned all along. And so now it's like a million times more fun and just so awesome. And I mean, it's like hanging out with your friend, your best friend, like in real life. Like anybody who's
Yeah.
listening, think about how fast time goes when you're hanging out with your best friend. You don't think about time. You don't think about, you don't even think about the event. You just want to hang out with them. You could watch a movie. You could go
Right.
play mini golf. You could go on a road trip. It's not the event or the activity that even is the point. It's the friend. It's the relationship.
Right.
And so I think that's what became beautiful about it is it didn't even matter what we were doing after that in life. And also at the same time, it didn't even have to be something, quote unquote, super spiritual. I found God just as much at times when I'm praying and, worshiping as I did just kind of walking around or making a video or feeding my son or just doing anything in life. I started seeing God in many aspects of my life because that's what you do with a friend is you just do life together.
Right.
And so after that, it became really beautiful and interesting in a way that I didn't even know was possible.
Wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
That is beautiful. I'm thinking for some of our listeners and viewers who don't really believe that they are God's best friend, or maybe they feel distant because of some trauma or maybe even losses like yourself. Um, I'm curious if someone were to come up to you and say, "Hey, Gabriel, I really don't feel God. I don't feel his love. I don't feel his presence. Um, I'm not really praying or taking God that seriously, but I do want a relationship with God and want to be God's best friend." What advice or what words, how, how would you respond to that if someone were to come up to you?
What's interesting is after losing my friends, God, I will the amount of times that I'll find myself in front of people who also have lost someone or experienced grief or trauma. It happens everywhere I go. Everywhere I go, this happens all the time, and so much so that it makes my wife laugh sometimes. I mean, I'll be on an airplane and like full on. I can be pretty introverted. My wife is the extroverted one. And so like on an airplane, I'm the guy with like I like the window seat. Give me the earphones, the pillow, the head, the sunglasses, everything. I'm just like I'm in my own little world over here. My wife is like saying hi. I like to. And so, but if I'm traveling by myself, I could be in full on introvert mode, and I'll like someone will like tap me on the shoulder, and I've come out of my cave of pillows and things, and I'm like, yes. And they'll be like, I don't know why. And they're like, I just lost someone recently. Like it happens everywhere I go.
Wow.
Everywhere I go, people just volunteer the information. I'll be
I
in
know.
I was in a doctor's office one time getting a checkup, and I had all these devices hooked up to me, and they're doing like something, and my wife's sitting in the chair next to us, and the doctor has her face away, and she's typing on the computer, and then all of a sudden, no one had said anything for like 5 minutes, and she's just typing away, and I'm just like sitting there waiting for her to say something, and she just goes, "I lost my friend recently. Don't know why I'm sharing this right now." And she just starts
Wow.
processing out loud. And I look at my wife, and my wife just like shakes her head. And now
Here we
I
go
put
again.
my pastor hat on, and I'm like, "I'm so sorry that happened to you." And we start chatting, and
Wow.
so I think for a while I was like, "Why does this keep happening?" And I think it's because I just want to tell each of those people, one, that I'm so sorry that happened to them. Genuinely, there's nothing like losing somebody. It's devastating beyond comprehension. And I've had people come up and talk about losing their children. People come up losing their parents. It's devastating, and there's nothing in this world can prepare you for that pain. And to try and the world doesn't wait for you to just process and grieve. Your responsibilities go on, bills go on, everything goes on. The world continues to move forward, and that's hard because we have to grieve in the midst of that. And so my my desire in those moments is to communicate something that the Lord did for me is to say, like, he's with you in the midst of that pain. he wants you to know that he's there for you, and you're not alone within this. What I didn't share is that when my second friend passed away, I was actually in Redding, California, and he passed away, and he died in a motorcycle accident in Southern California. And I was working that afternoon, and it was in the late afternoon. I was working, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, all of a sudden, I just had this thought pop into my head, and the thought was, "You are never alone, because the word alone does not exist, because I am always with you." And so I wrote that down on my phone, and I was like, "That's a strange thought to pop into my head out of nowhere." Um, I go home that night, and so I wrote it on my phone. I go home that night, and I find out, people messaged me and said, "Hey, your my friend had passed away, and it was this whole thing," and I was
Mm.
devastated and um, and so sad. And the next morning, and that night when I went to bed, I pulled out my phone and I read that note maybe 100 times just to fall asleep. You are not alone. You are not, because I felt so alone in that moment
Mm.
when all my friends were gone. When I had more friends in heaven than on earth. And so the next morning I woke up, and I remember I read the coroner's report online, and it said that he had died in a motorcycle accident, and I actually documented the exact moment that it happened because there's witnesses and things. And so it said that I think it was he died instantly at like 4:22 p.m. I can't remember the exact time. And I was like, wait a second. I pulled up my phone, and written the note at exactly the same moment, the exact same time. It was at 4:22 or 4:21. I can't remember. It was like a minute apart. And so
Wow.
when my
Wow.
friend had passed away in Southern California,
Oh my
the
gosh.
Lord spoke to me in Northern California instantly and said, "Gabriel, you are not alone. The word alone does not exist. I am always with you." And so that note, that little kiss from heaven, kept me like alive during that time, kept me afloat
Mm.
during that time. And so what I love to tell these people when I meet them is, you are not alone in this season. You are not alone. And I understand if they're depleted
Yeah.
and tired, and they don't have the energy to pray, and they don't even, they have so many questions, because everything, when you go through grief, your mind is, and your heart is clinging to understanding, when the Bible says the peace that surpasses understanding. But when you're going through trauma, that gets reversed, and all you want is understanding in order to have peace. But that's just not going to work like that. And so all you get is pain when you try and do it that way. And
Mm.
so I just tell them, like, all you what you have is enough. Faith the size of a mustard seed can move a mountain. And so if you have a desire the size of a mustard seed in order to get close to God, in order to talk to him, you're like, I want to get close to God, but I don't have any of the ability or effort. Well, guess what? That desire is more than enough right now in this season. And
Mm.
the Lord is more faithful than you are tired in this season, in this moment of pain. And so I just pray for them, and tell them that I'm going to continue to pray for them, and know that God is going to show them that He is a great friend, and that He is going to pull them out of this pit. And I tell them, maybe I'll share a little bit of my story and say, hey, like, what I'm experiencing right now is your future. You will get out of this, I promise. And I just kind of, give them a hug from the Lord in that moment, and walk away. So it happens all
Wow.
the time, though.
That's crazy. It's like you have a
Mm,
specific calling to minister to people who are going through grief and loss and pain because you've gone through that as well in unimaginable ways. And it's so true that so often when we're in the thick of it, we can't see the other side because we're like so in this darkness that's so debilitating. But
mhm,
then on the other side is when it's so clear. Like this has happened to me actually pretty recently. We did a episode about
mm,
depression and faith.
mm,
And it was crazy. Like I hadn't experienced like that kind of feeling of depression in a long time until literally like right before we released this episode. And I
mm,
was like, oh, I think the Lord actually allowed me to go through that to speak to people from a place of like empathy and compassion rather than like just the theology around like just trust
yeah.
God, it's gonna be okay, you know. Um,
Hmm.
so that brings me to I want to talk about like your ministry that you actually still do like a similar you're still doing like a ministry to people going through hard times but in a different way through your
Yeah.
videos and but you're also a pastor, you're also a father and parent. So I just want to ask like for you what led you into doing those videos, and like, and your film background? I know, like, was it what you imagined basically, like using your film experience to do, or how did
Yeah.
it happen?
Yeah, it's funny because, I had come to Bethel, learned my identity, grown closer with the Lord, and kind of in some ways just kind of gave up that film dream or desire because just the Lord wasn't really speaking about it or doing anything about it. And I had tried to knock on that door for many years, and uh and so I just kind of was like, okay, well, maybe either one, it's just never going to happen, and that whole thing was just a weird, moment, or two, it's going to happen at some point, and I don't need to worry about it because I have more than enough to focus on in the current season and what the Lord is teaching me. And there was always something like healing with my family or just my own identity, or, I ended up getting married, and just there was so many good, beautiful things that God was doing. And I'm like, God is, he's strong enough to figure all that out if I'm not supposed to figure it out. And so I just kind of left it on the shelf and let the Lord deal with it. And a number of years later, through a series of events, I felt like I was supposed to leave the job I was at and kind of step into film. I felt like all those like things were starting to line up to take a risk of a step of faith. Now the Lord didn't really tell me to step into film. It was one of those things where I couldn't stop thinking about it,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
out of nowhere. Whereas before I was trying to force it, and now I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I was a bit nervous because I had been like, well, not this again. We tried this, all the doors shut, and is this going to be the same thing? But I could not stop thinking about it to the point where I began
Mm.
to wonder if the Lord was in it this time around.
Mm.
Whereas before I tried to think about it all the time, and it wasn't the time. And
Hmm.
so it's a whole long crazy story, but I stepped back into film, and the Lord gave me incredible favor. I didn't have any training, any type of, I had, went to YouTube University basically for my film background, and I got so many job opportunities. When I stepped back into film that second time, or really like for the first time, I'd never applied for a single job. I got offered so many different things over the year. I'd go from one job to the next, to the next, to the next. And people would just message me or text me or call me and say, "Hey, I hear you're a cameraman," or I hear you do editing," and I would just say yes, yes, yes. And it was always projects that are way over my head. Like I had no idea what I was doing at the time, and I'm in charge of this big budget, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I'm gonna ruin these people's movie. I'm gonna ruin their everything. And I was on a I worked in a documentary, and I went to Mozambique, and I filmed Heidi Baker. And next thing I know, I'm in a Jeep with Heidi, like in the bush of Africa, and I'm just like sitting and I'm filming her, and I'm turn the camera off, and she's asking me questions about my life, and I'm just like, what is happening right now? How did I get here? I don't know what I'm doing, and but I'm just saying yes to God. So that's kind of been the story of my film journey. Is just I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm saying yes to God, and He gives me this crazy favor that I don't deserve, which is how it should be. It should be like that
Mm.
because
Yeah.
when He gives you favor that you don't deserve, it's easy for you to cling to Jesus in those moments because um, I never want to get into a place where I'm so comfortable with my own experience
Mm.
that I begin to not trust the Lord anymore.
Yeah.
And so I enjoy being in over my head. I'm just like, oh my gosh, careful what I'm saying. Lord help me. But I enjoy being over my head at times because it just makes it so easy to be thankful. It makes it so easy to be humble because you're like, well, I did not get myself in this moment into
Hmm.
this room, and so it just makes everything so much easier to
Mm.
see the Lord in His waking up every day and going, I need you today, God. Like I need you so much, Lord, and you came through yesterday, so I know you're going to come through today. It just kind of makes everything smooth. And so I did that for a number of years, but I was always behind the camera, always the camera guy, always the writer, always the editor, and making other people look good, and just kind of I enjoyed it. I
Mm.
enjoyed bringing other people's ideas to life. But I did that for maybe I don't know how many years, maybe 5-6 years. And then I left a big job, a big ministry that I was working for, and it kind of was a difficult, challenging ending that I got kind of burnt out so much that I kind of questioned, am I even going to do film anymore? Because the it was a bit of betrayal and mixed and terrible relationships, how it ended, and the ministry exploded, and it was just such a painful time. And I began to question, do I even want to do film anymore? Because I associated a lot of the pain with film now. And the Lord spoke to me, and He said, "The next time you do film, you won't be behind the camera; you'll be in front of it." And I was very confused by that because so far there had been nothing like that whatsoever. And so I said, "Okay." Part of me just didn't really care because I had been so, burnt out and hurt. So I spent a chunk of time just healing from that. And the Lord, just all He would say to me is, "You need to be ready. You need to be healed for what's next." And so
Mm.
I kind of I took a sabbatical for a whole year and didn't work. I
Hmm.
just stayed home and I just went after healing and spent time with the Lord. And I didn't know that pastoring was next on the agenda. And I thought it would be more film until the Lord one day gave me a dream about working here at Bethel. And that's a whole another journey in itself, of the Lord opening up a million doors that it would be impossible for me to open on my own,
Wow.
and getting the job when there's 1,000 other people who are more qualified.
Hmm.
Again, it's the story of my life, of just the Lord saying, I'm going, "Why do you have me here, Lord? Why me?" And he just always says, "Well, why not?" Because He's looking for a friend just to say yes. He's not looking for some overly qualified, fantastic, polished person. He's just looking for a friend to say yes. And that's more than enough for Him
Mm.
to work with. So I always want to be the friend that just says yes, and we work out the details along the way, which usually means me taking, like, walking on water when I don't have the ability to do it on my own. And so I'm just like hoping that I don't drown a lot of the time. And so, but I haven't drowned yet, thank God. And so, yeah, so I worked here for a number of years as a pastor and didn't do any film. I was very curious in the back of my head how like a Hollywood pastoring in Reading versus, like, how is that going to ever get connected back again? And
Yeah.
but I was like, well, the Lord knows what He's doing. And so it wasn't until about a year and a half ago in 2022, I hadn't done film, I hadn't done any editing, I hadn't done certainly any acting or anything like that at all, just nothing. And then one day I was just sitting in my house, and was scrolling Instagram, and I think at the time I had 1,500 followers, or around there. And so, which took me like 12 years to get. It's just kind of funny how that works. And so I was scrolling through the filters on Instagram, and I saw like this one filter where, and people may have seen it, where it's like Jesus is there and you green screen yourself like where Jesus is holding you.
Yeah.
And I next thing I know, I'm like, I put myself in it, and I'm just like making a joke. And I was just like gonna show my wife, like she's on the other couch. I'm just like, and I made like I said like a funny, line, or I can't remember what it was. And then I showed my wife, and she laughed. And then I just kind of posted it without really thinking about it. And then the next day, I found myself scrolling through the filters again, and there was one of Spider-Man flying through the city, and you're green screening yourself like as he's holding, Spider-Man's holding you. And I said this script about like how, this wasn't the first time that Spider-Man and I had met, because he threw my car one time at a villain, and so I was so happy to see him again. And it was this whole thing, and I was just like joking, and I realized how I was having so much fun just creating. And so
Mm.
I began every single day, I just made these videos, and they were so dumb. I mean, it's not like they were spiritual in any way, but they it was shocking to me how refreshing and life-giving it was. It reminded me of how film used to be, where it was
Mm.
life-giving, and it
Yeah.
was actually like a point of connection with the Lord and I, just like a place to create, where
Mm.
Him and I could sit, and I could just, like, it's just this fun place to create. And it wasn't a place of pain anymore. And so I think I it was shocking to me that I had actually gone through a lot of healing. That was the biggest shocker. I was like, wow, this isn't even painful anymore. It's actually quite fun. So I started making videos and videos, and it had nothing to do with trying to gain a following or even for other people to see. I think they all had like, 100 views or something like that. And it was just fun. And it
Mm.
was, it was, it was a place for me to like disconnect and just go and have an outlet. It was shocking to me. Then when like a month later, I was I was getting ready one morning, and all of a sudden I open up TikTok, which I had, funnily enough, I just told the person like a day before that I was like, TikTok is so dumb. I'm never gonna do that. And they were like, well, you should check it out. So the next day I download it, and I upload like some videos that I had already made on Instagram. And I think I had 4 followers on TikTok. One of them was like my wife. And so I was like, there was certainly no like following it at all. And so I didn't understand the app. I still barely understand it. And so I'm like, I uploaded these videos, and then one day I'm getting ready and I open it up and I see a little red, like the notifications just say 99 at the bottom, a little red 99. And I didn't know what that meant. And I was like, okay, what the heck is that? And so I clicked on it. I don't like notifications on my phone or whatever. So I was like trying to like just get it away.
Get rid of it.
Yeah.
And so I clicked on it, and I don't know what I thought it was. And so, and then I kind of went back into the feed, and then I looked back to the notifications, and it said 99 again. And I was like, what the heck? I thought I just removed that. And so I clicked on it, and then I read actually what it was. And it was like all these comments and shares and things. And I was like, wait, this is like for my videos? I had no idea. And so I clicked on it, and went from like, I don't know how many views 4 followers gets you, but it was many views. It was like tens of thousands of views on
Wow.
on the
Wow.
one video. And
Huh.
which was so mind blowing to me at the time. I was like, oh my gosh, 10,000 people, which is still a lot of people, but it's just funny to think back. Like I
Yeah.
was absolutely blown away by that. And so I was like, that would be crazy if it hit like 11,000 or 15,000. And I think like 20 minutes later, it was at like 30,000 or something. It was like skyrocketing past what I had thought. And then a couple days later, Instagram, a totally different platform, that one started blowing up. So it was kind of just randomly out of nowhere, not planned, certainly by any means, just a place to have fun and do stuff. So now it's kind of just become an interesting, weird thing that I do on the side of being a pastor, being a father, all these things. And when I have spare time, I make videos, make weird videos for people to see on the internet. So yeah.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
Wow. I'm so curious to hear about your creative process. I'm sure you feel
Pressure.
some pressure to top your previously
Yeah.
viral videos to some capacity. So, what is your creative process, and how do you
Mhm.
invite God into that? Like, tell us a bit more about what goes behind the scenes.
Yeah, such a great question. I think I've felt pressure once or twice while since starting, and I think I've been doing
Mm,
it now since um, I don't know, like a year and a half. I don't remember at the top of my head when I first started, but it's been around that time frame. So during that time frame, maybe feeling pressure a couple times, and the reason why I think it's only been a couple is because a big part of it is like how the Lord had brought it along, and how he's introduced it and spoke about it. He's made it clear that these are there's a prophetic destination that he's kind of growing me into,
Mm.
and so that's him. And then he's given me gifts as well, and like it says in Romans, the gifts and calls are irrevocable. And so these things aren't just going to go away. And so I try and approach it from the very beginning of saying, this is the Lord is the one who has opened the door and has put me in the room. I don't need to try and keep myself in the room or to keep the
Mm.
door open, because otherwise I'm just going to feel pressure all the time to
Yeah.
try and survive. And I just don't. I have no desire to do that. And so I say, Lord, if you're the one who's opened the door, then you're the one who has to keep it open. And so I try and approach it from the beginning of saying he's the pressure's on him to try and do anything. Not that there's any pressure on him, but just the responsibilities and expectations on him. And I just have to say yes. Just keep saying yes, and ideas will come or opportunities will come. And so I remember when I think it was before I came to Bethel. So this is like 15 years ago. I had this interesting experience that I've actually been thinking a lot about lately, and at the time I didn't understand. But I was in the car one day with my family, and I think I was maybe 20 years old at the time. And I remember you just kind of daydream in the back of the car. So I'm 35 right now. And so I'm in that weird millennial age where like you're before the internet, but now you're like you're living during we're very interesting people, millennials, because
Yeah.
we've experienced like weird dynamics of
Right.
like
yeah.
zero internet. Now we've like experienced a little bit internet. Now we're like space age technology internet. uh
Yeah.
where it's like whiplash. And so for me, car rides was really easy, just to like look out the window and just zone out. It's not like we needed a phone for everything. So I remember just zoning out, and I thought I was daydreaming, but I think the Lord was actually speaking to me. I started thinking about um, just randomly kind of like visualizing in my mind this one guy. This is going to sound really strange. I don't think I've ever really shared this before, but this guy traveling the world and dancing with different people from different cultures. So I saw this guy doing like this funny dance in like maybe like South Africa. Then one day he's like in China. Then next day he's in Norway, and maybe dancing with different people and the different cultures of maybe have those like in Brazil, and seeing how they dance. And just like, I don't know why I was seeing this. And I said to myself, that would make an interesting video if this guy just danced around the world in different cultures. And you saw like you get to appreciate the different cultures. And this guy has a funny dance. And I don't know why I was even thinking about that. And so I get home that night and I go to bed, and the next morning I wake up and I can hear my family talking and they're laughing. And so I go into the room and I said, "What are you guys laughing at?" And they said, "Look at this video." And I looked on YouTube, there was the exact same video that I had seen in my head. Is this guy traveling the world, this overweight guy, and he was just like dancing, doing this funny dance, and but he's like in all these different cultures, and it was like it would just be in one culture for like a few seconds, and then it would next thing when he was in like just different like Canada, or I don't know how they dance in Canada, but just different places around the world. And I remember staring at this going, wait, what the heck? I just thought of this yesterday, and very confused. And I felt the Lord speak to me and said, "Gabriel, that's how easy it is for me to give you an idea that the world has never
Mm,
seen. And that's how easy it is for something to become viral or interesting or whatever. It is so not challenging for the Lord to be creative, because before he
mm,
was Redeemer, before he was, Messiah and all these things, like he was creator. He created the universe.
Yeah.
And so it's a core of who he is to create. And so I remember at the time, I didn't really understand the depth of what God was really saying. But as years went on, it always kind of stuck with me. And I remember thinking, Lord, I need to have a conviction that you have endless creativity, and it's
Mm.
not challenging
wow.
for you to have ideas, for you to give us ideas in the world for, whether it's, writing, or whether it's like, new inventions, or whether it's things to do in the arts, or whether it's, wisdom or strategies in the government, or where it's, unlocking new technologies or blessing the world with advances in medicine. Like it's not challenging for the Lord to release creativity and bless the world. Why wouldn't he want to? And so I think he wants to do that with whatever passions that you have. And so for me, it happens to be film and
Mhm.
writing. And so the Lord said, "Gabriel, it's not challenging. Within our relationship, there's endless creativity." And so over the years, I've really tried to protect that conviction that God has endless creativity. And so over the last year and a half, it hasn't been 99% of the time, it hasn't been challenging to try and think of new ideas,
Mm.
because I'm
Wow.
approaching it, I'm starting it with the conviction of God
Mm,
doesn't run out of ideas. He doesn't. It's not challenging for the Lord to give you ideas. All you
Mm.
need to do is listen. All you need to do is wait. And the one or two times that it wasn't, that I felt the pressure, is when I forgot that. Is
Mm.
when I started seeing numbers, or a video did really well and I felt like I needed to try and make a video, and it's like, wait a second, what am I doing? And just reminding myself of the very beginning, going, God is the one who's pushing this thing forward. And so I just kind of take a breath and relax and go for a walk, or go play some basketball, and just I just take a week off. Don't even post anything on social media. Just take a week off and come back to it next week, and just a little more fresh.
So good. Wow. I feel like that's, first of all, it's funny when you were describing you had that vision or dream of the guy dancing, because it's like you can't even accuse
Mhm.
him of stealing your idea because you never told anyone about it.
yeah.
So it's like, what? So confusing.
Exactly.
But I
Yeah.
love that perspective. I think it's very encouraging, even for us, as content creators and hosting a podcast. There is sometimes subconscious pressure of like, well, what do people want? Or what is going to be interesting or valuable for people. But I
Mhm.
get the same conviction that you were saying. Like, it's not even about what is going to rank higher, what is going to get eyeballs. It's what the Lord wants us to do. And whatever that
Mhm.
is, like just trusting that the outcomes or whatever is up to him to decide. Our
Yeah.
role is just simply obedience, and not not idolizing, the calling that he's called you to, or
Yeah.
even the platform that he's given you.
Hmm.
So I think that's really key for people who might be listening to this right now, being like, I have this dream, or I feel like God's called me to something, but it's like what you said earlier is so important about doing the work to ground your identity not in that thing, so that
Hmm.
when God does entrust you with that thing, you don't cripple it, you don't choke it, because you're
Yeah.
trying so hard to validate your own identity or worth from that thing. So
Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Gabriel. I feel like we could talk like way longer and dive deeper. There's just so much interesting, I think, insights and valuable wisdom that God's just really shared with us today through this conversation. I did want to ask you one more question about, you
Mm.
wrote your book, God's Best Friend, I guess almost 6 years ago, I guess. And so
Hmm.
I'm curious, like looking back, what would you add, or what else have you learned about being God's best friend? And
Hmm.
what encouragement do you have for people who want to like really walk in the fullness of like what that looks like and means?
Um, it's a great question. I think writing that book, I published it. I self-published it when I was 30 years old. So I'm 35 right now. On my 30th birthday, I published it, and for years, people who were telling me, "You need to write a book. You should write. You should put, you know, your story in a book." And I was always like, "Yeah, yeah, I should," and I never did, and I was always procrastinating, and so I tried to motivate myself with like different things. Maybe it'll help with this people, and I never could get around to doing it. Maybe it'll help us generate more income, my wife and I, and then never could get around doing it. And so I never could find the right motivation. And so one day I went to bed and I said, Lord, you have to like give me the right motivation, because I'm not going to do it. Like whatever motivation you give me has to be bigger than the fear that I have to write this book, because it's a lot of fear apparently. And I went to bed that night, and the next morning I woke up, and I remember waking up and just feeling like different and feeling weird. I looked around the room, and I remember having this thought in my head, the phrase, my children, my children, my children. And at the time, we didn't have any kids. Uh, um, and so I was like, my children, why am I thinking about my kids, my future kids? And I realized that if I write this book, I will I will be able to hand my children something that not filtered through media, not filtered through the world, not filtered through society, not filtered through uh, anything at all. It's just the words of their dad, that even after maybe I'm long gone, my great grandchildren, that I can maybe in a way almost reach through eternity and help guide them and protect them, and any type of inheritance that my family has and myself has, cultivated, that they can step into, and it won't take them 30, 35 years to develop certain things. And it was mind blowing to me, like, oh my gosh, I could help protect them from like pitfalls that I've made, and step into victories that took me a long time to figure out. And and so it went from I should or I need to write a book to like I have to write a book. I
Mm.
have to write this book. And I wrote it
Hmm.
within 1 month of
Oh
that
wow.
motivation. That point,
Whoa,
I locked
that's
myself in a
insane.
room, and I just was blazing through that thing. I needed to do it because I couldn't wait to give that book to my children. And
Wow.
so the upside of all that is that I got done with the book in a very fast time. But then as soon as I was done with it, I remember I published it, and I just never spoke about it ever again after that to anybody, because people would ask me like, "Didn't you write a book?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And my wife would be like, "Aren't you gonna like share about it?" It was hard because I was like, I don't have any desire to, because my demographic was my children that we haven't had yet. So I'm like, my target audience is like, I'm just gonna hand them a book one day when they can read, and so, but with that, the Lord kind of took it and was able to take it, because I think my desire, the motivation was, I think, coming from like a better place now. He was able to take that book, and he's done some wild things with. I've gotten messages from people in different countries, and that I don't know how they got it. Like I have no idea how they got this book, and it helped them. And one time I spoke, I got I spoke in a prison. This guy wanted me to come speak in this prison for some reason, which, my gosh, was the most in over my head experience ever. I tried to get out of it, and they made me do like a background check, and I was hoping I'd somehow fail the background check because I didn't want to go to this prison. I was so scared. It was a maximum state penitentiary prison, and well, these guys are in there for life. And he told me to bring a handful of books with me, like 10 books. So I go there and I speak, and I was so nervous. I was so terrified, and I'm like, why did you bring me here, God? Like, I tried everything to get out of this, but I felt the Lord say to me, just talk about losing your friends. And I had
Oh,
15 minutes. That's how long they gave me. And so I went up there and I spoke about losing my friends. And these grown men who were like massive and covered in tattoos and just like 10 times bigger than me, they all started just weeping, crying. And so I left them my books. And the guy said to me as we were leaving, he said, Gabriel, these books will never leave this place ever. They will always be here. 50 years from now, if this book is still intact, it'll still be here. And
wow.
I realized, wow, God, it just changed my perspective. I'm like, you sent me to this prison because you want these inmates to know that you want to be their friend, and these guys will
Mm.
never get out of here, ever. And so
Wow.
the book has grown some legs and runs around a lot further than I ever thought it would in terms of my target audience. But I'm still most excited about that target audience to be able to someday read it. And my son, who's sleeping in the next room over here, he's only 16 months, can't read it just yet. And his favorite, all his vocabulary is dog and dad, and that's about. So he's not quite there yet, but I can't wait. And so anybody who's listening who has a desire to create anything, I would encourage you just to, instead of trying to motivate yourself with what you think is like, and they're not bad motivations, like wanting to make extra income for your family or wanting to bring this book to people so it'll help them. Those are great motivations, but it may not be the purest motivation for your specific walk with the Lord that is most efficient. And for me, I had no idea, but it was actually my kids, which was strange because I didn't have kids at the time.
Mm.
But it gave me vision, and it gave me, there's that saying where it says vision gives pain a purpose. And I was
Mm.
experiencing a lot of the pain of writing it, but I didn't have any vision. And so
Mm.
my prayer for you guys, anybody listening, is any projects or desires or things that you want to create, or things you want to start, or businesses, or whatever it is, my prayer is that you would sit with the Lord and he would motivate you in a way where to give you a clear vision for what's ahead of you, because it's a painful thing to birth something new that's never been done in your life. You have to overcome fear and procrastination and all these things. So that's my prayer for you.
Wow. So good. I know we said that was the last question, but this is the real last question. What is your vision then for, God's best friend or anything else that you're working on right now?
hmm Um, yeah, it's so interesting because I'm not sure. People ask like, "What's your goal with the social media page?" And um, I shared earlier, there's like 1,500 followers or 1,600 when I first started, and that took like 12 years to amass. And now in the last year and a half, it's like, uh, it's something crazy. Like with the different TikTok and or all the different social medias, it's like 350,000 or
Yeah.
360,000 or something more than that or whatever. Um, and I don't know what the goal with all of it is, to be honest. I think sometimes the Lord allows you to have understanding as to what you're building, and sometimes you don't even. You're just moving forward and eating the daily bread of saying yes. And so I think that's the season I'm in right now. Is I'm just saying yes. I don't even know what the full vision of it is. And so I think for me personally, I'm growing and working on that muscle and that faith that of what I shared earlier about how God. I have a conviction that God can give you an idea anytime. That was when I first had that thought 15 years ago. That was just a thought. It was just the concept of like, it was in my mind. But now I'm having to like walk it out and
Mm.
experience it, and so it's becoming more of a heart like belief than a a head knowledge. And so I think I'm being stretched to just have a conviction that God can truly speak to you at any time. And who knows where that will kind of eventually take me or my family to where, if it's Hollywood or working on different films or media and having to sit in a boardroom with people who aren't believers, and and having to go, okay, Lord, you're that same God who could speak all the time through those weird Instagram videos, and you're the same person who can speak now on this big budget film. And so, but you kind of start wherever you're at, and you practice and you grow those muscles, and
Yeah.
you grow more confident in the Lord, not in yourself, but in the Lord. And so I think, I don't know, the vision is just trying to grow in my confidence that God is he's very generous, and he's very kind, and he's
Mm,
very hilarious, and he's very creative. He is all these things. And
right.
so I think I'm just trying to grow in that in this season, and
Yeah.
not be distracted at times by numbers or analytics or different
Mm,
things that are not, they're important, and they're fun to look at, but they're not the priority,
yes.
and the goal. They shouldn't be, at least.
Yeah, so good. So good. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for just sharing and spending time with us. And I just feel like it's so encouraging to hear your story because it really reminds me. I just kept getting the verse about being faithful with the little and
Yeah.
just, being obedient wherever God has planted you and rooted you and whatever's right in front of you, just stewarding that the best that you can instead of getting caught up with like these worldly ambitions of like, I need to control the algorithm and I need to control my success and pave my own
Yeah.
destiny. It's like actually the Lord just wants us to follow him and be with him. And he'll lead us, as we
Yeah.
go. So thank you just for sharing. We know for a fact, like you have inspired so many people and are touching so many lives through your, I mean, you say they're weird videos, but I think they're genius. I think they're hilarious and so clever and creative.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to connect with you, I believe they can just go to your channels on social media. We'll link all the links in the show description below. God's best friend with a period in between. Don't forget the period. And yeah, could you just close us with a quick prayer actually for our listeners?
Yeah, thank you, Lord, for each person listening. And Lord, I pray that you would begin to pursue those people listening, in the same way that you pursued me. That you are so faithful, you are so kind, you're so patient, you're persistent. You keep knocking all the time, and you're just so good. And so, Holy Spirit, if there's anybody listening that desires that a closeness, or that's beyond what they're experiencing right now, or maybe they've been through pain, or even trauma, thank you, Lord, that you are patient, even within their hard times. But there's beauty ahead, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And so, Lord, I pray that you would just pull them out of those heavy places, and that they'd
Mm.
begin to laugh again. And if you ever need to go laugh, you can watch those videos and have a good laugh. And I pray, Holy Spirit, that you would fill them with a joy that's beyond even what they thought was possible when they
Yes.
laugh, at videos. And Lord, I pray that for people listening that are wanting to start something, or wanting to take a risk in creating something, and it doesn't matter if it's small, it doesn't matter. Like when I first started, like I said, it was just the enjoyment of doing it. It
Yeah.
wasn't like these videos were getting like 100 views, but that didn't matter because it was
Yeah.
just a fun place to connect with the Lord. And so, Holy Spirit, I pray that you would just push those people to take those risks and to do it, and it not be about numbers or algorithms, like Grace was saying, but it's about just connection and birthing something new. And there's something so fun, and it's an outlet, like a creative outlet, that I feel like people listening, some people like to write when they need to process, some people need to verbally just talk, and some people need to create. And so I pray, maybe if you're listening and you're feeling frustrated in life lately, maybe it's because you just need to create something and
Mm.
just go for it. So Lord, I pray that there would just be like fire on what they create, and it's just so much fun, and that they wouldn't be distracted or disappointed or frustrated by numbers or things. And if there's maybe people listening where things do explode and they go beyond what they ever thought possible, and there's so much favor on it, I pray that those people would lose sight or feel the pressure that it all has to be on them. That it's still the same thing that it was from the first day to where it is now, that it's a fun place of connection with you and them.
Yes.
So Lord, bless them, fill them with your presence, protect them. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Thank you so much for tuning to this episode. We really hope that it helped you and just encouraged you in whatever way that God wanted to do. We really, every episode we do, we pray that God would just speak the exact words that the listeners need to hear on the other side. And so, whatever takeaway you have, we just hope that you really process it. Don't give in to the temptation to just be like, okay, next episode, or okay, I'm going to move on with my life. Like, actually process through and marinate. Like, what does God actually want me to do or press into more in terms of intimacy with Him, in terms of understanding Him as like not just like the strict, serious boss in the sky, but actually a father and a close friend who's so loving and kind and compassionate and more gracious than we could even comprehend ourselves. He wants to come into the messiness of our lives, into the chaos of our hearts. And He's not just coming, when we have everything together. He actually wants to meet us exactly where we are to help us through it and to help us heal. Gabriel talked about healing, and that is such a big and important part. We talk about this all the time on the podcast. It's so important to do the work to heal our wounds and our dysfunctions. Otherwise, we just carry these things into other areas of our lives, and it leaks out in unhealthy, damaging ways, both to ourselves and those around us. And God doesn't want to give us things that we're not ready for, because we might abuse it. We might, make it toxic if we're not healing those things ourselves. So it's so important, if you haven't already, to invest in that healing, in that inner work. And one great way to do that is actually to take advantage of the coaching that we do. Alex does one-on-one coaching, and he is so good at it. You can just read the testimonials online for yourself. This is not me trying to be biased as his wife, but really, he's so good at helping people process through the messiness of their lives, their struggles, the areas that they feel stuck or just are bothered by, and how to actually untangle and navigate and process in a safe way, in a safe place, by connecting powerfully with themselves and with God. And it's really hard to explain. You kind of have to just do it yourself to understand it, but really take advantage of that, or any other resource that is out there. There's so many resources, so we just encourage you to take advantage of that. And last but not least, if you haven't yet, we really want to emphasize to get on our email list. There is so many exciting. We can't share all the details yet, but there are really exciting things coming up we don't want you to miss, and we want you to be engaged and be a part of it and be in the know. So make sure you are with us in the email list down in the description below. And yeah, we just can't wait to continue journeying with you and talking about how to live a faith-fueled, God-centered life in our everyday lives. So we'll see you again next week for another conversation on exactly doing this.